Hello and welcome back to the RevOps Show. Today we have a very exciting episode. Not only are Jess and Doug focusing on sales structures and how they connect with RevOps and why they're so important, there's also a chance for you to win Imagine Swag. Yes, you heard me right. Doug lays out all of the details about how to win one of our very own, very nice, and very comfortable vests at the beginning of the episode. Make sure you check out the video to see what it looks like if you're interested, and then also check out the actual website show notes for instructions on how to win if you don't catch them the first time around. So with that, I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Let's get into it.
Jess.
Doug.
Something must be wrong. We're recording this at the actual scheduled time.
We are. Weird.
What's happening with that?
Wow. That was aggressive. I don't know. Maybe we're finally getting our act together.
So Jess, you know what tonight is, don't you?
What's tonight?
Game 5, first round playoffs, Stanley Cup.
Oh,
I'm wearing my hat. Caps are tied with the Florida Panthers 2-2, 2 games apiece.
I was going to ask you if the Caps were even in because that I follow exactly zero hockey.
And I know I know why that is. I'm going to actually, because by the way, I'm wearing this wonderful vest
or swag.
Right. I'm going to bring this full circle because it's actually a little bit too warm for this. I'm going to be taking this off in just a minute, but don't worry, Jess, that's all I'm taking off.
Thank God.
So, quick question for you. What's the last playoff series the Washington Capitals won? What year?
2018.
Yes. The last playoff series they won the Stanley Cup.
That is really hard to read. I just want you to know that pattern on that hat.
Yep. I understand, but you were able to do it. Right. And so I realized that, we couldn't was thinking about Stanley Cup playoffs. And then I thought about our episode where we talked about the starting lineup for the Cincinnati Reds, and you were able to carry that conversation. And I knew you wouldn't be able to carry a hockey conversation. And
not at all.
It occurred to me in as I was preparing for this episode that, Cincinnati is an interesting town because it's got a Major League Baseball team, but nothing else. I guess it's got a football team. Actually, they made it to the Super Bowl. So I guess they got a baseball team and a football team.
Okay.
Right? They have no basketball team.
They do not have a basketball team now.
I mean, I realize the Kentucky players get paid, but.
Wow. Shots fired. Well, that's not a professional basketball team, but.
Well, they get paid.
And that's not technically in Cincinnati. I mean, it's over the river.
I understand. I had to take a swipe at Kentucky.
Yeah, always.
They have no NBA, no NHL team.
Correct.
Right. So here's the full circle. We're going to find out if anyone's listening and if anyone knows anything about sports. Right. So this nice vest, Strategic RevOps Advantage vest, $85 retail value. Anybody that can get to me a list of, I'm going to make it easy. I was thinking about all, but I'm going to go with 10 cities. 10 cities that have one or two of the prime four, a team in, one or two teams in one of the prime four leagues. So you've got NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB. Those are typically considered, the prime.
I've lived in like 3 cities that have had that.
Now, if we get multiple entries, then we're going to get the tiebreaker will be identify 5 cities that only have one.
Oh, wow.
Right. So Seattle used to be, well, actually, no, you have the Seahawks. So anyways, it's actually harder than
I live in one of those. I live in one of those cities now.
So I will give you
hint.
And I'll give, so you know what? We're going to give you 2 to get started. You got San Antonio.
You do. Yep.
And Baltimore.
Oh, yeah. Baltimore. Think about that.
Right. So free vest. We'll even pay the shipping.
Because we'll just know
that you're a RevOps pro.
Your sports knowledge is going to dictate if you're a RevOps pro.
Exactly. Well, this is, I mean, technically this isn't sports knowledge. This is geographic knowledge. Boy, man, my hair is short.
It
Holy
is
cow.
sports combined with geographic knowledge.
Holy moly. Is my hair cut too short? Did I go too much?
You'll be fine in a week.
You know the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut is, don't you? About 3 weeks.
But I'm bummed. All right, Doug. You.
Sorry, Jess, I can't hear you.
Thank you. We're off to a productive start. This is shaping up like a Friday episode. And we're not.
Okay, go on. Sorry, we're good. I'm good.
Doug's trying to trigger me, everyone. All right, so you had a topic that you wanted to talk about today, Doug.
We're gonna go north today.
We're gonna go north?
We're gonna go north.
Okay. As opposed to south.
As opposed to south. Or east or west. We're going north. We're going up. We're gonna hit one of the elements that in many ways is at the peak of what is strategic RevOps. Hence another reason why I was wearing the strategic RevOps advantage swag today. One of the things that I see happening, we talked about, by the way, our mistakes episode, there are definitely people listening. I don't know if any of them know which cities only have a limited number of major sports teams, but the response and some of the comments that I've gotten on our, don't be, the danger of RevOps becoming the Department of Sales Prevention. That definitely resonated with a lot of people. And it's, we've had episodes in the past where we talk about, where should RevOps report? That if we're talking about RevOps, if RevOps is going to play a strategic role, then it needs to be peer.
Yeah.
Right. Because you need to have the diversity of viewpoint, the diversity of mindset. And so inherently RevOps is a process-centered space. Right. So and as much as I emphasize that process is far more, is far broader and deeper than most people think about, we tend to think of process as a very linear and very limited. Boy, I'm going to jump down a rabbit hole. There's a restrictive element to process, but then there's, when you restrict things, you actually also free things. So when you restrict effectively, you actually free agency, you free flexibility, you free, those elements. But it's easy to fall into a very process-driven trap. And Jess, you'll probably empathize greatly, maybe have a little bit of a flashback. It's easy to fall into that's the right way to do it.
Yep.
Why? Well, because that's how you do it.
Yep.
It's also easy. It's really easy to end up playing somebody else's game because, the whole, RevOps is a continuous improvement initiative, and you can't continuously improve without learning, and you've got to expose yourself to other places and what are other people doing. And, let's not reinvent the wheel on all those things. I remember when I was at Merrill Lynch, they used to have people come along and they would share their story. And, everybody loves peer stories. We want to hear from somebody that's done it.
Yep.
And they're motivating stories. And I remember one week we had, typically we didn't have this many, but one week we had 4 different people come in who were all $1 million plus producers, all super successful. Most of them were multi-million dollar plus producers, very, very successful. They all came in with their story. That was some variation of, if you want to be a rock star in this business, this is what you do.
Yep.
And at the end of that week, I actually went to my sales manager. I went to our district manager, and I said, not for nothing, but I took copious notes in all 4 of these sessions, and all 4 people totally disagree. Because, so-and-so came in and said, this is what you have to do. Then, forget
right.
The second person came in and said, it's all about corporate. Right. Oh. And I'll never forget what the response was. The response was, Doug, what you have to do is take the best from each one of them. Sounds like it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yep.
Do you know what you get when you take the best from each one of them? You get Frankenstein.
Yep.
It sounds good, but wait, they don't, right? And so there's a whole bunch of elements that come into this. So what I want to talk about today is I'm going to get into the concept of sales structure. And if you look at the revenue acceleration framework, this is the guiding element. We talk about, solve upstream problems upstream, don't solve upstream problems downstream.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing more upstream than what's your go-to-market approach, what's your go-to-market.
Right.
And a key element of go-to-market is what's your sales structure, what's your sales approach. When you look at the go-to-market phase of the framework,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I want to emphasize is this is not a revenue operations specific element. This is not a sales or marketing specific element. Go-to-market is organizational. That is part of the organizational strategy. It's the element in the guiding policy that comes down to your market facing elements. So finance, back end operations, all of your disciplines. If you take our business acumen course, all 5 core disciplines of a business need to be a part of that. Just like go to market needs to be a part of the organization, operational strategy, HR strategy, etc. And so if you look at what that go to market does, it really is that, that's where you define the game you're going to play. One of my favorite books on strategy is a book called Playing to Win.
Mm-hmm.
It's written by A.G. Lafley and Roger Martin. And, part of it is, what field are we going to play in? Where are we going to play? How are we going to win? I don't know if you know this. I may have shared this with you. I've always been a fan of frameworks. I've always been a fan of having some element of process and being able to articulate that process. When I started Imagine back in 2004, can you believe that?
No.
18 years old. I've been doing this for 18 years.
We're
old enough to get drafted.
We are.
And if we're in Mexico, we're old enough to drink. If the company were in Mexico, it could drink. The first step of the process that I created was called define your game. And I don't think that you can scale effectively
Mm-hmm.
without being clear on what's the game that you're playing. What's the game that you're going to play? Because if you're not defining your game, then you're playing somebody else's game, or you're playing kind of no game. So it's your game, somebody else's game, or no game. Those are kind of like the 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you go back a long, long, long time ago, one of my favorite quotes, gosh, I don't even think it's in the top 5 anymore, but it used to be my favorite quote. Is there something wrong with me that I actually keep track of? Like I have an order to my...
There's something wrong with you. I don't know if that's what it is, but definitely.
You cannot control the wind, but you can adjust the set of your sail.
Yeah.
Right. And I've always remembered that. And if you haven't defined your game, if you're not clear on what is your game, then I don't think you can set your sails. Right.
Yeah.
It's the Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Where are you going? I don't know. Oh, any road will get you there. Right. And by the way, if you think about it, we're so overloaded with information. We're so overloaded with seeing what everyone else is doing. It's the old, every time I go over to my friend's house, when they invite us over for dinner, their house is always clean. There must be something wrong with us because their house is always clean. And this isn't new. You see this with social media. Everyone's telling, at best they're only telling you about their successes. And by the way, when they're telling you about their successes, more often than not, they're exaggerating significantly to just completely lying. Right. But you don't know that. It all sounds really good. And so you get into FOMO and you get depressed and you start jumping from thing to thing to thing, and you actually lose your identity. And when you lose your identity, you have nothing to compare to but, the unattainable. And I see that happening in businesses all the time. And I think that's what's driving all kinds of exhaustion. I think that's leading to, what has been dubbed the Great Resignation, et cetera. So a major element for revenue operations, and I actually think revenue operations is the guardian of the game.
Yep.
Right. Because I think that your sales disciplines, especially, you show me a sales organization that's not being pulled to the opportunistic zone, I'll show you a sales organization that is not anywhere near capturing its reasonable potential. And I think the same thing is true in marketing. And I think the same thing is true in success. Like that, it's kind of like that's the course that you're on. You're gonna naturally cheat because you're pulled into, very specific lanes, if you will. And so you're going to become naturally opportunistic. And before you know it, you were clear on the game that you were playing, but now you're not clear. And so a major element of the revenue operations team is they're the guardians of the game. I like that, actually. The guardians of the game.
Yep.
Cleveland
like that
Guardians of the game.
Cleveland Guardians.
Now, Cleveland does not qualify for the contest because Cleveland has the Cavaliers, the Browns, and the Guardians. They don't have an NHL team, so that's 3 of the 4. But anyways, and by the way, for those of you that don't know, the Cleveland Indians are now the Cleveland Guardians. So, and so a major element, as a matter of fact, what we've defined as go-to-market, there's 4 key areas of go-to-market. There's the economic model. There's the market, defining your market, ideal client profile, personas. There's your messaging, your story, and then there's your sales model. And what we're going to talk about today is the sales model.
All right. So tell me about sales model. What is that?
So your sales model is what is in your business model, and if anyone's curious about really digging into what I'm talking about here with business model, I think the book is called Business Model Generation. But if you look up business model canvas, there's a lot. I'm going blank. Alex Osterwalder, I think is his name, is the creator of that, which really gets into, your business model is what are the mechanics of how does your company generate, create value for a core group of people in a manner that makes money. Your sales model gets into the specifics of, the machine, if you will. What is the machine that is transforming interest and engagement into revenue? And so your sales model could involve salespeople, or it may not involve salespeople, right? I mean, if you're e-commerce, direct to consumer type, your sales model is self-serve. It's an unassisted sale, right? Yeah. It's still a sales model. You still have a sales process. You just don't have salespeople, right? And so there's kind of, and I'm oversimplifying well, I shouldn't say I'm oversimplifying. I'm simplifying for purposes of trying to create some level of understanding. So you basically have 3 levels. It's self-serve / unassisted, rep assisted, which means it's still very marketing driven. It still needs to be something where the customer is driving the entire process, and a person assists in there. That could be service orientation. It could be questions need to be answered. It could be sometimes a salesperson gets involved in the end. But the salesperson is not driving that. And then the third option, or the third model, is it's rep directed. The rep is at the center of, and this does not discount the importance. The customer is still in control. But there is a rep that's there. And when we think of salespeople, when we think of sales process, the default is to think of the rep directed. And I should say, especially in today's world, in a digital transformation world, there is a distinct and important difference between rep directed and rep assisted. I should also add that these 3 models do not operate, they're not mutually exclusive. There might be an aspect of your business that's one model, another aspect that's a different model. Amazon is self-serve unassisted when you're buying from Amazon store, but if you're buying from AWS, it's rep directed. Although there's an element that's self-serve, like I could set up, we've done self, right? So it plays all of those. If you sell office supplies to companies, you are probably rep directed to win the contract and rep assisted to self-serve for the ongoing transaction. So again, they all, they can meld together, and you can, you need to design that to fit what your business need is. Now, when you look at it, the underlying economics of those 3 games, those 3 models, are very, very different. The flexibility are very, very different. So one of the mistakes that I see happening all the time is people are polishing the rails and organizing the deck chairs of their Titanic.
What does that mean?
They're optimizing. They're doing the wrong things better and better. They're really, really good at doing the not right things.
Right? So how do you know what the right things are?
Well, there's some elements of, let me back up. Okay. It's not just, are you doing the right things? Are you doing the right, viable, and sustainable things?
Okay.
So sometimes the right things are not viable or sustainable. I'm sorry, I hate to tell everybody that. Sometimes the right things aren't viable, right? And I see this frequently with new ideas, new companies. Somebody's got a great idea. It's a big market, but it's a new idea. It's, they're selling something. It's $3,000. It's $250. Whatever, it's a, so by the way, their economic model, the game that they're playing here is, making a little bit of money off of a whole lot of people, right?
Yep.
And they have a rep-directed sales model. Well, the problem with that is economically, that's not going to work. Now, it might be okay early, right? Because sometimes what you're doing, like if you're looking to scale your business, like, fully, what you're going to do early on is not always scalable, right? So here's an example of two things. I come in and I have a rep-directed model, and it's not sustainable, right? But that's what my model is, and there is no path to making it self-serve to significantly more self-serve.
Yep.
There's another place where I'll see companies that are in that same place. So they'll take the very soft rep assisted. So again, if it's soft assisted, a rep can handle far more, they have a far broader coverage area, if you will, so they can assist on much more revenue, generate more gross profit to cover what that cost is. But sometimes you come out with something new, and I've seen, a lot of people, product-led growth is doing this. Product-led growth tends to be a model to turn your sales model into self-serve or rep-assisted rather than rep-directed. Because, by the way, if it is rep-directed, it's sales-led sales, not product-led sales. And I've seen some examples, both as a customer, but also from an advisory standpoint, where I've come across a product and I'm really interested, I'm really intrigued with it, but I don't understand it. And I don't want to, I understand a little bit of it, but I don't understand it enough to like, where does this work? What, how would this be, et cetera, et cetera. And I, for whatever reason, I either can't justify it or it hasn't hit me enough so I'm not willing to spend the time to understand it. Well, they're trying to follow a model that is going to scale, right? So it's unassisted, no salesperson involved type thing. And when you say, well, why aren't you using a salesperson here? It's, well, we can't afford it, basically.
Right.
Right. Or, well, to do that, we'd have to raise money, and we don't want to give up equity.
Right.
No, I get that. I don't want to give up equity either. Right. But there, again, you're playing the wrong game because, based upon the job to be done, where are you in the, in the life cycle of your business? So there's an element that says, how do you know if you're doing the right thing? One thing is you have to understand your economic model, right? We can do a session on that if we want. You have to understand the economics. And I'm sorry, the economic model is math. It's 90% math. I as a matter of fact, I was going over an example of economic model with somebody the other day. This was a company that had just gotten funded. They were looking at hyper growth. I think that they were, I think they had 37 customers to date. Mm-hmm. And so, they were gonna 5x growth over a 3-year period of time. Broke it down into, year one, they needed 36 new customers. So basically they needed to double the number of the customer base, which, by the way, is a lot.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is 36 doesn't sound like a lot. We only need 36 customers, right?
Yeah.
That's not a lot. You need 36 wins. Okay, what made it a little bit more than that is if you took a look at the average sale price and you took a look at the margin, that represented roughly $1 million of gross profit. So, okay, you're getting 36. Well, no, you're not winning 36 customers. You're winning $1 million of gross profit. But you know what? I mean, they just raised $4 million. $1 million in new revenue. That's not that much. There are startups that raise $1 million, that do $1 million in sales all the time. And I'm not saying that they don't, but they really weren't acquiring $1 million of gross profit because their model was built on the fact that, well, they had actually, they had talked about a 5% churn, which, by the way, a 5% churn would equate to a 20-year lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I think anyone that is saying that their customers are going to stay with them for an average of 20 years, you might be being a little bit aggressive in your economic model. Okay. And as a side note that takes us off of sales model and sales structure,
mm-hmm.
I love how we generate new terms to hide certain things. There's this new term called net revenue retention, which I am not suggesting net revenue retention doesn't matter. And what I typically see for net revenue retention in funded SaaS companies, and I'm beginning to see it in other companies, our net revenue retention is 110 to 120%. So that's a negative churn. That is, our customers generate more revenue the next year versus the previous year. And I'm not saying that number doesn't matter. There's a land expand element that demonstrates expand, that demonstrates a lot of things. But if you're not also looking at the underlying, what is your customer churn rate? And I want to emphasize, you cannot have a negative customer churn rate, right? You can't have a negative customer churn rate. If you're not watching that, then you can have the growth phase of relationships hide underlying weaknesses in your fundamentals, which again goes into, a part of your sales model. We're talking about salespeople, new acquisition. This is also going to impact what's your service team, what's your account management team.
Yeah.
Right. So we got them down to 7 years, right? Which, by the way, is a 15% churn.
Mm-hmm.
If I told you if I took your tech company, you're going to have 15% churn, you'd be like, whoa.
Right.
So on that 7 year, lifetime, what they were really looking to do was to acquire a revenue producing asset in the next year worth $7 million, right? Those 36 customers were going to generate $1 million of revenue on average for an average of 7 years. That's $7 million. Well, now you're looking to acquire a $7 million asset. All of a sudden, that doesn't sound so small.
Right.
Because, by the way, I bet you there are a lot of other people interested in that $7 million.
Sure.
Right. It's a competitor. Right. And so you have to look at that and you have to begin to assess, I think that of the 4 million they had raised, they had allocated about $1 million for customer acquisition. And it was like, well, guess what? And remember, that was year one. They to 5x their growth, they were going to need to, basically double the number of new customers the next year, and then 50% growth the next year. And all of a sudden, the economics became pretty clear that wasn't going to fly, right? And my favorite question, I asked them, when do you plan to raise Series B? Their first answer was, well, our expectation is we're not going to have to raise Series B.
Mm-hmm.
To which I replied, that's what everyone who raises Series B says after they get their Series A. When we finished the economic model, I remember the CEO said, you know what, Doug, I think we might be looking at Series B a little sooner than we had than we had anticipated. And the point here is, you can ignore your economic model. Your economic model doesn't care.
Right.
So you've got to look at that. Now, I've seen other places where the economic model says, no, you've got to figure out how to get this into another place. So the model is going to tell you a lot. And then, there's a lot of trial and error. What is that? It's like, how do you know if you have product market fit? I can't give you the tic-tac-toe formula, but I can tell you what are the signs that you'll see when you know that you have it.
What are the signs you'll see?
When you've got the right sales structure?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question, Jess.
Don't sound so surprised.
Well, you should have warned me about that one. Because it's interesting, especially if you're in a growth phase.
Sure.
that, there's always a leak in the roof. So it's not like, I mean, I know a lot of people struggle with product market fit because there was the belief that people will be beating a path to your door. You're going to see a consistency. You're going to begin to see a consistency in pattern. Now, a major element here is, again, what's the underlying model? Are you selling, 15 units for multi-million dollars each? Are you selling, a million unit? Like, so those things are going to have, the consistency pattern is within a degree of variance. So you'll have more predictability. You'll have greater see-through. I think one of the things that exists in most sales processes is it feels very much like it's a black box. It's opaque.
Yeah.
You'll understand where those points are. So if you look at like the deals framework, those things become clear. There's a and then there are some very important lift indicators that begin to move in your direction. Your growth rate is bigger than your capacity. It shows that you're utilizing your capacity effectively.
Okay,
which is both efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to hire easier. Hiring becomes less of a
that's an interesting one.
Less of a black box. So I think the main thing is just greater predictability and consistency. More, right now you put, in the early stages when you don't have a clear model and structure, you put money into your sales model engine and you hope, or you throw a lot of gasoline into it and you just floor it.
Yeah.
Here it's more, we put gas into the engine and we know within a band, within a range, what are we going to get? So there is more. I don't want to say there's no risk, but there's certainly a lot less risk. There's less variance. So I think
did you say that you hire easier? Is that because it's clearer what you're looking for, because it's clearer what that structure is and what it should look like? So then it's clearer who and what you're looking for as far as rep goes, or?
So I think it's that, but also the reason that you have a sales model, I think it goes into what Peter Drucker, one of my favorite quotes from Peter Drucker, which is build the genius into the system. So for example, one of the hardest models to hire for is the traditional model, right? The traditional model is salesperson does everything, full cycle sales rep. They find, they win, they serve, they keep, they expand. That's where most sales organizations start because they have to.
Yep.
It's really simple. It's a very hard model to hire for, especially in today's world. You never really know why someone is successful. You can look and you can try to quote unquote clone your top performers, but the danger is there's always something, there's always a hidden factor. And also you get limited by your lowest, your biggest constraint becomes your limiting force. And that could either be skill set. Like I know a lot of people that are great account managers, they'd be horrible at new business.
Yeah.
I know people that are great at new business, they suck at account management. Right. Or I know people that are good at both, but then as they get more customers, they can't generate more new business because their customers are right. And so you have all these constraints that come in. And so what are we hiring for? There's also by definition, because it's a more people-driven element, there's going to be greater variance in the customer experience because who I'm working with. You see this a lot, in companies that have a very strong value proposition and a very strong sales structure. Customers like their sales rep, they appreciate their sales rep, but they're not addicted to their sales rep. And what I mean by that is if their sales rep, quote unquote, were to change, it wouldn't be like when I was at Merrill Lynch. When I left, most of my customers left with me.
Yeah.
Right.
That's because they were addicted to you, Doug.
Right. Well, and, because the truth was it was a Doug value proposition more than it was a Merrill Lynch value proposition. Right. And even to the level that it was a Merrill Lynch value proposition, Doug took credit for it. Right.
Sure.
The customer doesn't know that. And so hiring for that and sustaining that, and in today's world, what we see is that model, it reaches a big point of diminishing returns. So you think about the next structure. I call that a model. I'm sorry, traditional was a structure. The next structure is what I call specialized. That's where you begin to introduce an account management function. Hey, these are our new business people. These are account managers. Well, one thing that happens is I need fewer new business people for account managers, because theoretically, at least, a new business person has no capacity limit. Right. They win a piece of business, they turn it over to account management. So, every year I fill up the next account manager.
Right.
So that lifts that up. I also can hire more effectively because I now know what the roles are. I can begin to bring in certain aspects of specialization. So let's say that we serve different industries and we're not ready to go to a full vertical strategy all the way through, but we do know that vertical is going to help that expert knowledge. So maybe I begin to bring in vertical knowledge at the account management level because, I can scale that. And so people are matched to their talents more. So they're more likely to stay. You're simplifying the calculus, which makes it, you're opening up, by clearing what you're hiring for, you're opening up the talent pool. Because if I'm going to hire somebody to be, I used to say this when I was at Merrill Lynch, my brother would be an excellent financial advisor. He would never have been able to build the financial advisory business in the traditional way. I mean, he could do it now and but he could not have been hired as a stockbroker to then win customers, though he would have been excellent at delivering on that. And so my brothers of the world never entered that business. And by the way, one of the reasons why it has a bad name is a whole bunch of people that couldn't actually do the work well, but they could sell
the work. Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Then you get to, when Merrill Lynch was a matrixed organization, right? So you had horizontal responsibilities. I was in essence the generalist, but Merrill Lynch also had investment management. They had insurance. They had corporate banking. They had mortgages. And so there was a vertical element. And so you had a sales organization that had, you might call it subject matter expertise, product knowledge.
Yep.
Right. And so what I see happening is that, companies are oftentimes looking for the lowest common denominator, the average path. What's the path that best serves all of these different functions? And the moment you start saying what's the path that best serves all of these, what you're really saying is what's the path that's the least shitty for all of these. And what it is, it's shitty for all of them. Right. And it's super shitty for some of them, but from from a full breadth standpoint, it's the less overall shitty, it's only right. And, we've talked before and going to revenue operations is the guardian of the game. What they also are is they're the managers. They are the synthesizers of complexity.
Yep.
Right. Complexity is the toxin for growth. Existing, the mere fact of existence increases complexity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a term called adulting, right?
Adulting. Yeah, I don't like it.
Right. But you know what you have to do to get to adulting?
You have to
exist.
Yeah.
Right. So, complexity, the natural course is, the law of thermodynamics says entropy is always increasing. Heat is always increasing. Complexity is always increasing. Complexity needs to be managed, right? So we start off as we've got one salesperson. They do everything.
Yeah.
Right. We pick up more complexity. We can't sustain that complexity. The cost of managing that complexity gets larger, right? This is why you have no man's lands, right? There are places where, well, we're not big enough to really support the structure of a specialized or matrixed organization.
Right.
But we've got too much complexity for a traditional organization, right? That's no man's land. You're too big to be small. You're too complex to be simple, but you're too simple to be complex, right?
Right.
Too big to be small, too small to be big. And that's why, part of what you need to understand is where are your waypoints? And I can tell you that I've seen companies where, like in professional services, $1 million is a key number. I know a lot of professional services companies that get to $2 or $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And at 2 to 3 million, they're making less money with 10 times the heartache that they were at $1 million. Because you can make a really good living as $1 million professional services company. When you get to 2 to 3 million, all of a sudden you're like, those things don't support you quite as much.
Right.
And you can't, you need to bring in elements of management oversight. You need to bring in systems that increases your costs. Well, guess what? I mean, to some degree, if you're going to go past 1 to 1.5 million, as an example, in professional services, you better be shooting for 5 million.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's probably not worth it.
Right.
Right. And so understanding those things, it's, you're always managing the issue of how much complexity are you managing? Now, I would say that the danger of saying, hey, I'm just going to stay at 1 to 1.5, as an example, is you're still going to pick up complexity, and the world is changing. You better pay attention to what are the underlying economics there.
Sure.
But that begins to get us into a whole nother place. So once you begin to understand and define what's your sales model, what's your sales structure, what are the key metrics that you're using to follow this, now all of a sudden, the things that you're going to do if you're in a traditional structure are, the decision calculus is very different than if you're in a specialized calculus or specialized structure versus a matrix, and like all of those things are they need to be managed. And this is where, going back to our episode on zones of execution, this is where zones of execution becomes so critical.
Sure.
I see people address sales structure. They realize, okay, we've got the wrong sales structure. We're reorganizing the sales team.
Right.
We're bringing everybody in. We're putting everybody in the field. Where, my favorite, used to be at one time is we're giving all the salespeople BlackBerries. We're taking all the technology away. We're getting a new CRM.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the new CRM not going to change. Like, if you've got a structural problem, you might need a new CRM to enable.
I thought that was the answer to everybody's problems. It's not like a magic wand that just does everything for you.
And so this is why this is a zone 3 and major zone 2 issue. You've got to know where you're going. What is the company that you're going to be? If you're not growing, you're dying.
Right.
Right. And growing, again, means growing in capabilities. It does not necessarily mean growing in revenue.
Sure.
Right. Based upon that previous conversation, though most often, and certainly I think most people listening to this are looking to grow revenue as well. Right. But where to keep your sales structure robust and to not make your salespeople, to not make your contributors feel like they're always under the constant torque of change, the Damocles sword of change.
Yeah, that's a new one.
Right? You know who Damocles is, right?
No, I don't.
Damocles is the one who had the sword hanging over him all the time. By a string. The fear that the sword is going to break from that. That's a heavy sword. The string is going to break and it's going to stab me. Right.
Right? Gotcha. Yep.
Right. It's somewhat counterintuitive to eliminate the feeling of always being under the torque of change. You have to be constantly changing.
Yeah.
Right. I was sharing somebody this the other day. You may or may not know this. You used to be in the travel business like me. Did you know that a plane is off course more than 90% of its flight?
I knew that because you've told me that before, but that's the only reason I don't think I ever knew that when I worked there. Yeah.
But, and when you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. Why do you need autopilot? Well, you need autopilot because what it's doing is it's constantly making these just really small adjustments, changes to get you, to get where you need to go. The wind's shifting, all those things are happening, right? And so you're constantly on there. You have to know where you're going. And your sales structure is more than one acceleration cycle, more than one play away. So where are we going? How are we operationalizing this? How are we staging this? How are we incrementing improvement? What are we testing so that our performance zone can perform? This is especially important in small companies because oftentimes it's the performance people that are responsible for change. And so they're doing these big, huge change things at the same time they're supposed to be performing. And so they just do a shitty job at both. Right. So even if you just, this is what I always say. If you don't know the answer, guess, but don't just guess with conviction. Right. And what that means is do it and watch. And by the way, if you do know the answer, do you know what that is? That is guessing with conviction. Because no one knows the answer, A. And if you did know the answer, well, the answer is different tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, that's sometimes the biggest danger is your model, your structure is dialed in. You get complacent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then you start doing efficiency and you start doing financial engineering and why is net revenue retention? And this is the skeptic's view. Why is net revenue retention become the hot topic? There's enough legitimacy in it that it helps hide customer churn, customer retention. And why is that? Well, because in the first 3 years of a funded company's life, they probably don't have much of a churn problem.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So their churn numbers look great, but then they hit a place where, okay, churn begins to happen. Already. And again, I want to emphasize net revenue retention. There's validity there. Right. It's why I always like to look at one of the measurements I look at for a company that wants growth is your top quintile growing at a higher rate than your company's growing.
Yeah.
Are my biggest best growing at a faster rate?
That's always fascinating to me when we do that.
Mm-hmm.
That piece of the analysis is how is the top quintile, because it's oftentimes horrifying to look at, but I mean it's a great indicator.
Right. And another great indicator to use is what's the average of your top quintile.
Yep.
What's the growth rate of the average top quintile? That should be growing at a higher rate if margin expansion is something that you're looking for.
Yeah. I want to take the guess and listen one step further, though. I think it's not just guess and listen. I think it's guess and test. You know, you're making a guess, you're making a hypothesis. You've got to test that, and so it's not just about listening to it. It's about testing and seeing how that's performing.
Yeah. Yes, though I want to emphasize the test. I mean the guess with conviction, because what I see, it's really funny. I see people that are very timid on the big, like the structural idea.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And they're very certain on the tactic, and I like to say, I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt. I'm better not having doubt on the bigger thing, and testing the smaller thing with the realization that I understand I'm wrong on everything. Right. And so I'm triangulating my way to that right place. But my point is, don't let the lack of knowledge say, this is the structure that I think we need to move to. What do we need to do to begin to get there? Run your tests and then, follow the plot.
Sure. Whew, that was a lot.
I told you it was going to be a good one.
Yeah. No, so my big takeaways are know the game you're playing. And by the way, that is increasingly becoming a theme on this podcast. Know the game. I am forever going to refer to RevOps as the guardians of the game from here on out. I love that. And, I think making sure that you're determining your economic model and letting that drive your sales structure and your sales model is crucial. So those are my big takeaways.
Well, there you go.
Thanks, everybody.
Me want cookie.
Wait
Until
for
next
it.
time, Jess.
Wait, Doug.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. RevOps is the guardian of the game, and above all else, you should figure out what game it is you're playing so you know how to structure what you're doing. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and share the episode. If you have any questions you would like to ask Doug or Jess about sales structures or anything RevOps related, Or if you're wanting to put in a submission to win a vest, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @demandcreator. Until next time, remember, you can't solve your upstream problems downstream.